In a span of less than 24 hours, the world's most critical energy artery was thrown wide open, only to be violently slammed shut once again. What exactly happens when a sovereign nation single-handedly weaponizes the flow of 21 million barrels of oil per Dalton Y? Does this spell the sudden unraveling of a decades-old maritime order? And more importantly, how will this invisible shockwave quietly drain the wealth from your own pocket? I am Daniel Mercer, and today we are cutting through the noise to expose the brutal geopolitical theater currently unfolding in the Middle East. The ink was barely dry on the latest geopolitical assessments when the administration in Tehran executed a maneuver that caught the international community completely off guard. The Iranian Foreign Ministry announced the immediate lifting of the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. On the surface, it appeared to be a monumental concession, a rare moment of de-escalation in a region perpetually on the brink. The official statement declared that contingent upon the implementation of the ceasefire in Lebanon, all commercial vessels would be granted safe passage through this vital maritime choke point. For a brief moment, global markets exhaled. Yet, in the ruthless game of grand strategy, a sudden retreat is often the most lethal form of attack. This was not a surrender. Rather, it was a brilliantly engineered trap, actively shifting the entire strategic burden directly onto the shoulders of the United States. Tehran effectively divided the international stage into a classic psychological operation, playing the role of the highly reasonable actor, by publicly offering to secure the transit of global shipping, a route that facilitates nearly a fifth of total global oil consumption and represents a $1.2 trillion economic lifeline. Iran insulated itself from the accusation of holding the global economy hostage. They presented an offer that seemed perfectly rational, yet carried profound underlying consequences. The devil, as always, was embedded deep within the fine print. Within days of the initial announcement, the Iranian military apparatus introduced a revised maritime regime. The strait was indeed open, but exclusively on Tehran's terms. They established 5 non-negotiable mandates for any vessel attempting to navigate these waters. First, ships must strictly adhere to navigation routes explicitly designated by Iran. Second, the passage of any military vessels is strictly prohibited. Third, every single transit requires explicit, prior authorization from the Iranian armed forces. Fourth, this entire arrangement remains absolutely conditional upon the sustained enforcement of the Lebanese ceasefire. And fifth, perhaps the most devastating blow, no passing vessel or its cargo may possess any affiliation whatsoever with the United States or Israel. For the vast majority of the global south, these stipulations were merely bureaucratic red tape. Tankers bound for India, freighters heading to Malaysia, or supply chains connecting to various African nations view the Persian Gulf purely through the lens of commerce, not conflict. To them, complying with Iranian regulations is a negligible price to pay for securing uninterrupted access to energy resources. They are perfectly willing to operate under this new paradigm. However, for Washington, this framework was nothing short of a strategic death sentence. Iran had essentially extended an olive branch wrapped in concertina wire. The geopolitical ball was forcefully kicked into the American court. The United States had to make a choice, accept the terms, and implicitly recognize Iranian sovereignty over a global choke point, or reject them and shoulder the blame for the ensuing economic fallout. Predictably, the United States maintained its strangulation of Iranian ports, and simultaneously, Israeli forces resumed artillery strikes. The illusion of an open strait evaporated instantly. Tehran closed the gates once more, proving that in this high-stakes standoff, the doorway to peace was never truly unlocked. It was merely cracked open to reveal the artillery positioned right behind it. Indeed, to understand the true weight of Tehran's 5-point decree, we must look past the merchant tankers and focus on the steel-gray hulls of the world's most powerful navy. For decades, the Persian Gulf has been treated as an American lake, a strategic backyard where the United States Fifth Fleet operated with absolute impunity. But the geometry of power has shifted. By demanding that all military vessels seek explicit authorization to transit the Strait of Hormuz, Iran hasn't just issued a regulation. It has effectively served an eviction notice to the old maritime order. Consider the physical reality of the United States' presence in the region. The coastline of the Persian Gulf is a dense archipelago of American military infrastructure. You have massive installations in the United Arab Emirates, sprawling logistical hubs in Qatar, essential facilities in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Oman. Most critically, the tiny island nation of Bahrain serves as the headquarters for the United States Naval Forces Central Command. These bases are not self-sustaining islands. They are complex organisms that require a constant, massive flow of personnel, equipment, and supplies. And that entire life support system passes through a single, narrow artery, the Strait of Hormuz. The irony is as sharp as a desert wind. The very bases designed to project American power across the Middle East are now quite literally behind Iranian lines. If the United States accepts Iran's requirement for prior authorization, it is a de facto admission that Washington no longer holds the keys to the kingdom. If the American commander in Bahrain has to ask a clerk in Tehran for permission to move his fleet, the concept of American hegemony in the Gulf becomes a historical footnote. It is a strategic checkmate where the king is still on the board but has no legal squares left to move into. This isn't merely about the movement of ships. It is an assault on the foundational logic of the petrodollar. The global dominance of the United States dollar is inextricably linked to Washington's ability to guarantee the security and flow of oil from this specific body of water. Control over the Persian Gulf was the silent collateral that backed the greenback. Now, Iran has essentially flipped the table. They are signaling to the world that there is a new, singular hegemon in these waters. And it speaks Farsi, not English. For the United States, the situation has become a logistical and psychological nightmare. We are witnessing the ghost fleet phenomenon. Currently, significant elements of the American Navy are idling in the Arabian Sea, hesitant to force a passage that could trigger a full-scale kinetic escalation they aren't prepared to finish. There is a profound, almost tragic humor in the fact that the United States Central Command's naval leadership is effectively locked out of its own home. They are looking at their headquarters in Bahrain from the outside, separated by a thin strip of water that has been transformed into an impenetrable political wall. The strategic landscape of the Persian Gulf has been permanently altered, turning the massive American bases into gilded cages, ornate symbols of a power that can no longer move without its rivals' cons. And in the theater of modern empire, the most devastating weapon isn't the one that destroys an army, but the one that makes that army irrelevant. Furthermore, to grasp why Washington is currently paralyzing its own fleet, we must dissect a deeply cynical proposition that surfaced during recent diplomatic backchannels. Reports indicated that American strategists, echoed by renewed threats from prominent political figures in the United States today, floated a staggering compromise, an equal 50-50 split of the transit revenues and administrative control over the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, framing this as a mere financial transaction drastically underestimates the stakes. The transit tolls alone, while potentially amounting to billions of dollars annually, given the 21 million barrels of oil flowing through daily, are merely a fraction of the true prize. The United States was not asking for pocket change. It was demanding a co-ownership of a global choke point. Washington's calculus was simple. Retreat one step, split the geopolitical dividends, and maintain the illusion of indispensable American oversight. Yet, for Tehran, accepting this deal would have been an act of strategic suicide. It would have completely nullified the immense sacrifices and leverage gained during the recent 40-day conflict. Why endure decades of crushing economic sanctions and fight a grueling proxy war to dismantle an old maritime order, only to invite the very same rival warships back into your strategic depth for a percentage of the profits? Unsurprisingly, the Iranian leadership categorically rejected what amounted to extortion disguised as diplomacy. This brings us to the precarious reality we see today. Because Iran refused to share the throne, the American naval vanguard remains stranded in the Arabian Sea, physically and politically locked out of the Persian Gulf, unable to force a passage without igniting a catastrophic regional conflagration. The United States has resorted to a rather desperate, archaic maneuver, an external blockade. By attempting to choke off Iranian commercial vessels from the outer perimeter, Washington is essentially trying to construct a quarantine around a nation it can no longer directly intimidate. But this external pressure campaign is fighting a relentless ticking clock. With the Lebanese ceasefire set to expire in a matter of days, the strategic dilemma falls squarely back on the United States. Will they risk a kinetic strike to enforce an obsolete hegemony, or will they watch their external blockade crumble under the weight of global energy demands? Ultimately, Washington is attempting to extract concessions at the negotiating table that it utterly failed to secure on the battlefield. It is the geopolitical equivalent of trying to harvest a crop from a field you have already surrendered. As a direct consequence, the current geopolitical landscape has degenerated into a grueling, high-stakes war of attrition. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively barricaded once more, the United States has deployed its remaining naval assets to establish a secondary perimeter near the Gulf of Oman. It is a desperate, retaliatory quarantine, a final card played by an administration that suddenly realizes its geopolitical deck is nearly empty. We are now witnessing a bizarre, mirrored blockade. Tehran locks the inner gate while Washington barricades the outer courtyard. Yet, in this test of endurance, the pain tolerance is fundamentally asymmetric. The Iranian establishment has weathered an unrelenting storm of comprehensive economic sanctions for over 4 decades, painstakingly engineering a highly resilient, self-sustaining shadow economy for them. Navigating a localized maritime blockade is a familiar, if uncomfortable, routine. They are perfectly content to let the international supply chains grind to a halt while they wait. The true, agonizing pressure rests entirely on Washington. There are merely 3 days remaining before the Lebanese ceasefire officially expires. When that diplomatic hourglass finally runs out, the United States faces a paralyzing binary choice: either authorize direct kinetic strikes to enforce its will, thereby igniting a catastrophic regional war, or silently watch its remaining deterrence evaporate into the Persian Gulf breeze. Recent political rhetoric from Washington, including renewed threats to resume military action if Tehran refuses to capitulate to the new transit terms, rings incredibly hollow. It reveals a profound and dangerous miscalculation: the expectation that one can simply walk up to a negotiating table and effortlessly extract monumental, strategic concessions. Concessions that could not be secured through 40 days of intense multi-front proxy warfare is deeply flawed. It is akin to a desperate gambler demanding a massive payout at the cashier's cage using chips he never actually won on the casino floor. The house sees right through the bluff, and the vault remains firmly closed. In the cold arithmetic of global power, you cannot magically negotiate a victory that you failed to secure on the battlefield. This is Daniel Mercer, signing off. We will keep watching the horizon, so you do not have to.